Chapter 49. The Pulse Beneath the Code. Time skip, lab. Bruce shook his head. All our work is gone. Ultron cleared out, used the internet as an escape hatch. Steve looks at them. Ultron. Natasha looks at them. He's been in everything. Files, surveillance. Probably knows more about us than we know about each other. Alisa leans against a smashed terminal, inspecting a shallow cut on her palm. He doesn't just know data, he knows how we think. He watched us for hours before he broke out. He was studying the cracks. Natasha glances over at her and nods grimly. And he knows exactly which ones to kick. Rhodes points to Alisa before looking back to Tony. He's in your files, he's in the internet. What if he decides to access something a little more exciting? Maria's eyes widened slightly. Nuclear codes. Rhodes points to Maria. Nuclear codes. Look, we need to make some calls, assuming we still can. Natasha speaks up again. Nukes. He said he wanted us dead. Steve shook his head. He didn't say dead. He said extinct. Clint looks at everyone. He also said he killed somebody. Maria shook her head. But there wasn't anyone else in the building. Tony speaks up. Yes, there was. Tony brings up the now-destroyed 3D image of Jarvis consciousness. Alisa's posture stiffens. Her heightened senses pick up the frantic, jagged frequency of the remaining code before anyone else even processes the visual. Alisa spoke up softly as a chill hit her voice. Look at the symmetry. It's entirely broken. Bruce shook his head. What? This is insane. Steve looked down. Jarvis was the first line of defense. He would have shut Ultron down, it makes sense. Bruce looks at him. No, Ultron could have assimilated Jarvis. This isn't strategy, this is rage. Suddenly, the air in the room shifts violently. Thor barges in and grabs hold of Stark by his throat, holding him up. Alisa instinctively moves, dropping into a low, braced stance near Steve, her eyes tracking the asymmetric threat. Steve speaks. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Clint looks at Thor. It's going around. Tony speaks to Thor. Come on, use your words, buddy. Thor looks at him mad. I have more than enough words to describe you, Stark. Steve steps forward. Thor, the Legionnaire. Thor drops Tony and looks over to Steve. Trail went cold about 100 miles out, but it's headed north, and it has the scepter. Now we have to retrieve it again. Natasha shakes her head. Genie's out of that bottle. Clear and present is Ultron. Cho looks over to Tony. I don't understand. You built this program. Why is it trying to kill us? Tony starts laughing. Banner subtly shakes his head at him to get him to stop. Thor looks at him. You think this is funny? Tony turns from his computer. No, it's probably not right. Is this very terrible? Is it so? Is it so? It is. It's so terrible. Thor walks forward. This could have been avoided if you hadn't played with something you don't understand. Alisa steps out from the shadow of the monitor, her voice steady but biting. He understood the mechanics, Thor. He just chose to ignore the pulse. Tony snaps his head towards her, pointing a defensive finger. Oh, don't you start, Oregon. I didn't ignore anything. I looked at the big picture. He turns back to the rest. No, I'm sorry. It is funny. It's a hoot that you don't get why we need this. Bruce looks at Tony. Tony, maybe this might not be the time to. Tony cuts in. Really? That's it. You just roll over, show your belly every time somebody snarls. Bruce shakes his head. Only when I've created a murder bot. Tony shakes his head now. We didn't. We weren't even close. Were we close to an interface? Steve spoke up. Well, you did something right, and you did it right here. The Avengers were supposed to be different than S.H.I.E.L.D. Tony looks around. Anybody remember when I carried a nuke through a wormhole? Rhodes shook his head. No, it's never come up. Alisa held back a laugh as she knows the tone coming out of Rhodes, the exhausted dad tone. Tony looks at everyone. Saved New York. Rhodes shook his head again. Never heard that. Tony speaks louder. Recall that. A hostile alien army came charging through a hole in space. We're standing 300 feet below it. We're the Avengers. We can bust arms dealers all the live long day, but that up there, that's the end game. How are you guys planning on beating that? Steve looks at Tony. Together. Tony looks at Steve. We'll lose. Alisa locks her eyes on Tony. Her dry sarcasm is gone, replaced by a cold, grounded reality. Then we'll do it standing next to each other, Tony, not hiding behind a cage you built out of panic. Tony looks at her as his jaw tightens as the words hit a nerve. A cage keeps things out, Alisa. It keeps us alive. Steve steps into Tony's line of sight, shielding Alisa slightly as he holds Tony's gaze. Then we'll do that together, too. Tony looks at him for a moment before turning away as Steve looks at everyone. Thor's right. Ultron's calling us out, and I'd like to find him before he's ready for us. The world's a big place. Let's start making it smaller. Tilda. Maria, Steve, and Alisa comes out of the elevator. He's all over the globe. Robotics labs, weapons facilities, jet propulsion labs, reports of a metal man or men coming in and emptying the place. Steve looks at her. Fatalities. Maria shakes her head. Only when engaged. Mostly guys left in a fugue state going on about old memories, worst fears, and something too fast to see. But it's not just the twins anymore. Witnesses at the propulsion lab in Berlin reported a third asset. Steve's brow furrowed. The Mikkelsen girl, Strucker's hidden subject. Maria nods. Exactly, Alia Mikkelsen. He kept her completely off the grid until the Sokovia raid, but now Ultron has her off the leash. Reports say she moved like a ghost, tore through a reinforced steel vault with her bare hands, and left a scent of ash and sulfur in the room. Alisa leans against the edge of the conference table, her expression dark as her instincts prickle at the description. A quadbrid, hellhound, werewolf, vampire, witch. She's a walking supernatural toolkit. Strucker had her humanity locked down under an inhibitor just to control her. If Ultron has her alongside the twins, he's got a mental sweep, speed, and raw, volatile magic on his payroll. That's a lethal combination if you don't see it coming. Steve nodded toward her, his expression hardening. Maximoffs and Mikkelsen. Well, that makes sense he'd go to them. They all have someone in common. Maria looks at them. Not anymore. She hands Steve a tablet showing a photo of Strucker's dead body, with the word peace written in blood on the wall next to him. Alisa tilts her head, her heightened senses picking up the violent, heavy residual echo of the scene just from the visual data. She mutters, well, that's not subtle. Clint is speaking on his phone nearby. That's a negative. I answer to you. Yes, ma'am. Steve interrupts him, stepping into his line of sight. Barton, we might have something. Clint looks at Steve before telling someone on the other end. Gotta go. He hangs up quickly and Steve looks confused. Who was that? Clint looks at them. Girlfriend. Alisa raising an eyebrow, a deadpan smirk cutting through the tension. Funny. I didn't know your girlfriend sounded exactly like a highly classified tactical operations manager, Clint. Clint shoots her a warning-filled glare. Drop it, Gilbert. Alisa raises her hand as she walks backward into another room. Don't have to tell me twice, Archer. After Steve has gathered the rest of the team, he projects the photo of Strucker's body onto the main screen. Tony looks confused. What's this? Steve looks at Tony. A message Ultron killed Strucker. Tony looks at the image. And he did a Banksy at the crime scene, just for us. Natasha speaks up. This is a smoke screen. Why send a message when you've just given a speech? Alisa thinks for a moment before looking at Natasha. Because a speech tells you what he wants you to hear. A murder tells you what he's trying to hide. Steve nods as he looks at everyone. Strucker knew something that Ultron wanted us to miss. Natasha shakes her head. Yeah, I bet he. She looks at the computer monitor. Yep, everything we had on Strucker has been erased. Steve shakes his head. Not everything. The team goes through the physical files they have left on Strucker, papers scattering across the table. Steve speaks up. Known associates, Baron Strucker had a lot of friends. Bruce speaks up. Well, these people are all horrible. Tony notices an image. Wait, I know that guy. Tony grabs the file from Bruce. From back in the day, he operates off the African coast black market arms. Steve gives Tony a heavy, accusing look. Alisa shifts her gaze between them, her arms crossed. Tony looks at them. There are conventions, all right. You meet people, I didn't sell him anything. The photo shows a rugged man named Ulysses Claw as Tony continues. He was talking about finding something new, a game changer. It was all very Ahab. Thor steps closer, pointing a massive finger at the scar on the back of Claw's neck. What's this? Tony looks confused. It's a tattoo. I don't think he had it. Thor cuts in. No, those are tattoos. This is a brand. Alisa studying the jagged edges of the mark from over Tony's shoulder. That's not decorative. That's a punishment. Someone wanted to make sure it hurt every time he looked in a mirror. Bruce identified the brand on the computer. Oh, yeah, Alisa's right. It's a word in an African dialect meaning thief, in a much less friendly way. Steve looks confused. What dialect? Bruce tries to pronounce the name. Wakanada, Wakanda. Tony looks at Steve as Steve looks at him. If this guy got out of Wakanda, with some of their trade's goods. Steve looks at him. I thought your father said he got the last of it. Bruce looks at them. I don't follow. What comes out of Wakanda? Tony looks pointedly at Steve's shield. The strongest metal on Earth. Alisa's eyes widen slightly as pieces click together. Vibranium! If Ultron gets his hands on a horde of that, he isn't just building a body anymore. He's building an invincible one. Steve turns to Tony, his jaw set. Where is this guy now? Chapter 50. No peace, only quiet. Time skip. Salvage yard. Claw spoke to someone on the phone. Don't tell me your man swindled you. I sent you 6 short-range heat seekers and got a boat full of rusted parts. Now you will make it right, or the next missile I send you will come very much faster. He ends the call and connects to another call. Now, Minister, where were we? Suddenly, the lights flicker violently and die. Outside, the heavy, rhythmic hum of the shipyard generators grinds to a dead stop. A thick, unsettling silence drops over the office, followed instantly by the sharp, metallic smell of burnt ozone and sulfur. Claw spoke. Yeah, the enhanced, Strucker's prize pupils. The twins step into the office from the shadows. Standing right behind them, emerging effortlessly from the dark, is Alia Mickelson. Her posture is entirely fluid, her eyes glowing with a terrifying, shifting mixture of amber and crimson. The supernatural heat radiating off her skin makes the cold air in the room warp slightly. Claw picks up a dish of candies from his desk. Want a candy? Oh, sorry to hear about Strucker, but then he knew what kind of world he was helping create. Human life, not a growth market. The twins look at each other, but Alia's expression remains completely deadpan, her locked humanity leaving only predatory stillness. Claw looks at them. You didn't know. Is this your first time intimidating someone? I'm afraid that I'm not that afraid. Wanda speaks up. Everybody's afraid of something. Claw points to her. Cuttlefish, deep-sea fish, they make lights. Disco lights. Womb, 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 to hypnotize their prey, then womb. I saw a documentary, it was terrifying. Pietro speeds over to pick up a candy from Claw's desk. Claw jerks at the sudden movement, but before he can steady his breath, Alia casually reaches out and crushes the heavy corner of his solid steel desk into fine powder between 2 fingers. Claw staring at the ruined desk. So if you're going to fiddle with my brain and make me see a giant cuttlefish, then I know you don't do business, and I know you're not in charge, and I only deal with the man in charge. As if on cue, Ultron breaks through the glass window, shattering the frame and knocking down Claw. Ultron speaks up. There is no man in charge. Let's talk business. He leans down to Claw. Let's talk business. Claw, trembling, directs his men to retrieve the vibranium from his secure stash. Ultron speaks. Upon this rock I will build my church, vibranium. Ultron chuckles and remotely transfers money into Claw's bank account. Now, so are you. It's all under your dummy holdings. Finance is so weird. But I always say, keep your friends rich and your enemies rich, and wait to find out which is which. Claw looks at Ultron. Stark. Ultron looks at him. What? Claw speaks up again. Tony Stark used to say that. To me, you're one of his. Ultron becomes mad. What? I'm not. He seizes Claw by the throat. I'm not. You think I'm one of Stark's puppets, his hollow men? I mean, look at me, do I look like Iron Man? Stark is. In a sudden spike of mechanical rage, he chops off Claw's arm. I'm sorry, I am sore, ooh, I'm sure that's going to be okay. I'm sorry, it's just I don't understand. Don't compare me with Stark, it's a thing with me. Stark is, he's a sickness. Tony appears through the ceiling in his suit, thrust blazing. Ah, Junior. He lands heavily on the catwalk with Thort, Steve, and Alisa. You're gonna break your old man's heart. Ultron rolls his eyes. If I have to. Thor speaks up. Nobody has to break anything. Ultron tilts his head at him. Clearly you've never made an omelet. Tony looks at them. He beat me by 1 second. Pietro speaks up. Ah, yes. He's funny, Mr. Stark. It's what comfortable, like old times. Tony looks at the weapons. This was never my life. Steve steps forward. O3 can still walk away from this. Especially you, Alia. Strucker isn't pulling your strings anymore. Pietro steps completely in front of Alia at Steve's words, his jaw tightening defensively as he shields her from the captain. Alia tilts her head as she laughs. Didn't little Miss Portland tell you? Once a vampire's humanity is off, it can be hard to switch it back on. Wanda speaks up next. Oh, we will. Steve looks at them. I know you suffered. Ultron scoffs. Captain America, God's righteous man, pretending you could live without a war. I can't physically throw up in my mouth, but... Thor cuts in. If you believe in peace, then let us keep it. Ultron points to Thor. I think you're confusing peace with quiet. Tony speaks up. What's the vibranium for? Ultron looks at Tony. I'm glad you asked that, because I wanted to take this time to explain my evil plan. Ultron unleashes a blast at Stark. His drones drop from the ceiling, swarming Steve and Thor. The Maximoffs spring forward, and Alia lets out a low, predatory snarl that vibrates through the metal floorboards as she launches herself directly at Steve. Claw yells to his team, "Shoot them." The mercenary yells back, "Which ones?" Claw replies, "All of them." The rest of the team, including Natasha and Barton, drop into the lower levels, clashing with the drones, Claw's men, and the Enhanced. Steve block a brutal, concrete cracking kick from Alia with his shield. Alisa, look out. Pietro speeds toward Alisa like a blur, but her quick reflexes allow her to drop her shoulder, letting him clip her arm instead of her chest. Pietro skids to a halt, shooting a glance back toward Alia to make sure she isn't overwhelmed by Thor before he lunges back into the fray. Alisa rolls through the impact, coming up with a discarded iron pipe and sweeping it down to smash a drone that was dropping onto Natasha. Natasha smirks at Alisa. Nice assist. Alisa yells as she continues to fight. Keep moving. There are too many moving parts here. Steve managing to drop his shoulder and knock down Pietro as the speedster circles back. Stay down, kid. Seeing Pietro hit the ground, Alia's eyes flare a violent, blinding crimson. Abandoning Steve, she blurs across the floor, backhanding a drone that got too close to Pietro and tearing the arm off a mercenary who raised a weapon near him. Pietro quickly springs back up to his feet, flashing her a grateful, breathless smirk before diving back into the chaos. Wanda moves through the chaos like a ghost. Ultron speaks through the drones to Wanda. It's time for some mind games. Wanda weaves her red energy through the air. She targets Thor first, then slips through the shadows behind Steve. Steve swings his shield, but the red mist catches him across the eyes. Thor stumbles. Steve yells to Thor, "Thor, status." Thor replies, "The girl tried to warp my mind. Take special care, I doubt a human could keep her at bay. Fortunately. I am mighty." Thor's eyes glaze over. The scene shifts for him, transporting him to a grand, decadent party in Asgard. Wanda slips past him and flashes her energy directly into Steve's eyes. Time skip, Steve's vision. The gunfire and clashing metal dissolve instantly, replaced by the soft, echoing warmth of a big band orchestra playing a slow tune. Steve blinks, finding himself standing in a grand, beautifully lit 1940s dance hall. The smoke of the shipyard is entirely gone. Standing right in front of him, looking radiant in the soft golden light, is Alisa. She isn't wearing her usual combat gear. She wears a classic, elegant gown from the era, looking at him with a gentle, serene smile he has never seen on her face before. Steve breathes heavily, reaching out to touch her hand. Alisa, how are we here? We were just in Africa. Alisa steps into his space, placing a soft hand on his shoulder, completely relaxed. The war is over, Steve. We finally won. We can just go home. Imagine it. Steve smiles, a profound sense of peace washing over him as he wraps an arm around her waist. They begin to sway to the music, stepping perfectly in time with the orchestra. For a long, beautiful moment, it feels real. Steve looks at her. I've waited a long time for this. Alice's smile falters slightly, her eyes suddenly shifting from their natural color to a dark, hollow depth. But you knew it couldn't last, didn't you? The lights in the dance hall suddenly flicker violently. The music distorts, twisting into a low, terrifying screech. Steve looks around as the other dancers dissolve into ash. He looks back at Alisa, but her features begin to ripple and tear. Her jaw cracks open as she undergoes a painful, violent woj, turning into a terrifying Wesson form right in his arms. Steve panics, trying to hold on to her. Alisa, no, hold on. Alisa's voice distort, echoing cry of pain. You can't protect me, Steve. You can't protect any of us. Suddenly, the floor beneath them collapses into darkness. Thick, heavy iron chains burst from the shadows, wrapping around Steve's arms and dragging him backward, forcing him away from her. Steve yells, Alisa. He struggles against the chains, but he is completely pinned, forced to watch as the illusion of the hall burns away, leaving Alisa standing alone in the dark, suffocating under a wave of black smoke. Time skip, Alisa's vision. On the physical floor of the shipyard, Alisa senses the shift. Her heightened awareness registers Wanda creeping up behind her, but before she can swing her iron pipe, the red mist floods her senses. The world goes utterly silent, an unnatural, dead silence. Alisa blinks. The shipyard is gone. She is standing in the middle of a dense, fog-covered forest in Portland. The air is freezing, smelling heavily of ash, decay, and fresh blood. She turns around and sees Steve standing a few feet away, his back to her. Alisa looks at him. Steve, get up, it's a trick. The witch is in your head. Steve doesn't move. Alisa steps closer, reaching out to touch his shoulder. Her hand brushes his jacket, and he suddenly collapses forward like a hollow shell. When she looks down, the ground beneath her feet dissolves into a mass of writhing, shadowy hands. From the fog, Alia Mickelson steps out, her amber-crimson eyes burning through the mist. Beside her stands a towering, monstrous shadow with glowing red eyes, the ultimate hunter. Alia's voice echoes from every direction, cold and devoid of humanity. You thought you could hide among the humans, Grimm. You thought a shield could protect you from what you really are. Alisa tries to look away, but the shadows force her head up. She looks down at her own hands. They are covered in the blood of the people she tried to protect. The faces of Steve, Clint, Katie, and Natasha look up at her from the dark earth, their eyes lifeless. Alisa's voice crack, a rare flash of raw terror breaking through her guarded exterior. No, I didn't do this. I didn't choose this. Alia speaks again. You always bring the slaughter. It's in your blood. You can't save them from us. You can't even save them from yourself. Time skip, back to reality. Back in reality, Wanda tries to sneak up behind Barton, but he quickly turns and fires an electric arrow directly onto her forehead. I've done the whole mind control thing. Not a fan. Pietro speeds in instantly, kicking Barton off his feet with furious force. He snatches Wanda, but before he blurs away, he reaches out his other arm and catches Alia securely against his side. Alia's shifting eyes lock onto his, her predatory posture instantly easing into compliance at his touch. Holding them both tightly, Pietro blurs out of the shipyard and vanishes. Clint mutters, "Yeah, you better run." Barton pushes himself up, wiping blood from his lip. He looks around the room. Thor is leaning against a pillar, muttering to himself. Steve is on his knees, his helmet dropped to the floor, staring blankly at nothing. A few yards away, Alisa is leaning against a rusted shipping container, her eyes wide and unseeing, her hands trembling violently as she grips her arms. Clint yells, "Whoever's standing, we gotta move, guys. Alisa, Cap." Stark corners Ultron in the upper shipyard as the vibranium crates are loaded onto a getaway transport. Ultron looks at him. The vibranium's getting away. Tony looks at him, "And you're not going anywhere." Ultron shrugs his shoulders. "Of course not, I'm already there. You'll catch on. But first, you might need to catch Dr. Banner." Stark angrily shoots Ultron's current shell, blowing it to pieces, and immediately flies off into the sky to intercept the Hulk, leaving Barton alone on the floor with a completely broken team. Chapter 51, where heroes go to break. Time skip, Quinjet. With everybody back on the Quinjet, free from their respective visions. Maria looks at everyone though the radio. "The news is loving you guys. Nobody else is. There's been no official call for Banner's arrest, but it's in the air." Tony speaks up, "Stark Relief Foundation." Maria replies, "Already on the scene. How's the team?" Tony looks around at everyone. "Everyone's. We took a hit. We'll shake it off." Maria tells them, "Well, for now, I'd stay in stealth mode and stay away from here." Tony asks, "So run and hide?" Maria nods on the screen. "Until we can find Ultron, I don't have a lot else to offer." Tony looks at everyone as he sighs. "Neither do we." He looks over to Clint. "Hey, you want to switch out?" Clint shook his head. "No, I'm good. If you want to get some kip, now's a good time, cause we're still a few hours out." Tony frowns. "A few hours from where?" Clint stares ahead. "A safe house." In the back of the jet, the silence is thick. Steve sits with his head in his hands, the echoes of his vision vibrating behind his eyes. Alisa sits directly across from him. Her hands are tightly locked in her lap, her knuckles white as she fights off the residual terror of her own hallucination. Steve pulls his hands down, his eyes scanning her face, instantly knotting the tense, guarded line of her shoulders. Steve speaks to her in a low voice. "Hey, your hands are freezing." Alisa doesn't pull away. Instead, she subtly turns her palm up, squeezing his fingers back with a fierce, grounding pressure. "It's just the adrenaline. The air in here feels loud." Steve's thumb traces the back of her knuckles, his voice dropping lower. "It wasn't real, Alisa. Whatever she put in your head." Alisa looks at him. "I know, but it felt like a memory for both of us." The Quinjet lands outside a large, isolated farmhouse surrounded by open fields. The team walks slowly toward the porch. Thor looks confused. "What is this place?" Tony shrugs his shoulders. "Safe house." Clint looks at them as he holds Natasha. "Let's hope." Clint calls out as he walks inside. "Honey, I'm home." Barton's heavily pregnant wife, Laura, walks in from the kitchen. Clint does a little smile as he walks over. "Hi, company, sorry I didn't call ahead." Laura shook her head. "Hey." Tony leans over to Thor as Laura kisses Clint. "This is an agent of some kind." Clint looks at his team. "Gentlemen and Alisa, this is Laura." Laura smiles at everyone. "I know all your names." They all look at her awkwardly. Alisa, standing close to Steve's side, breaks the tension with a small, appreciative nod. "Nice to meet a civilian who doesn't immediately try to file a property damage claim, Laura." Laura smiles warmly at her. "Oh, believe me, Alisa, with Clint around, I'm used to things breaking." Clint hears footsteps. "Ooh, incoming." Clint's children, Cooper and Lila, run into the room. Lila yells as Clint picks her up. "Dad." Clint smiles. Hi, sweetheart, hey, buddy. He kisses the top of Cooper's head. Tony looks at them. These are smaller agents. Alisa rolls her eyes slightly. They're his family Stark. Tony blinks, his eyes darting from Clint hugging his kids back to Alisa. He holds up his hands in a mock defensive gesture, a classic deflective smirk masking just how thrown off he actually is. Family, right. Human offspring, I knew that. I was just stress testing Clint's operational security, which, by the way, is terrifyingly good. Capsicle, did you know about the pint-sized legacy project? No. Good, makes me feel slightly better. Alisa looks at him with her brow raised as Tony rolls his shoulders, walking a step closer to the kitchen counter, looking around the rustic farmhouse with an exaggerated air of critique to cover his awe. He looks over to Alisa. And for the record, Alisa, I am fully aware of what a family looks like. They're just usually less flannel adjacent. Besides, you can't blame me for being suspicious. Legola's over there has been hoarding secrets like a dragon on a gold pile. What else is he hiding? A backyard orchard? A sensible retirement fund? Alisa rolls her eyes again before she noticed Natasha's face lighting up as Lila asks, Did you bring Auntie Nat? Natasha walks over with her voice being in a teasing tone. Why don't you hug her and find out? Lila rushes towards Natasha, who picks her up in her arms. Steve steps forward, his hand still casually resting at the small of Alisa's back. Sorry for barging in on you. Tony looks at Clint. Yeah, we would have called ahead, but we were busy having no idea that you existed. Clint shrugs his shoulders. Yeah, well, Fury helped me set this up when I joined. He kept it off S.H.I.E.L.D's files. I'd like to keep it that way. I figure it's a good place to lay low. Steve looks over to Alisa, as he wanted that for her, as Laura tells Natasha that she missed her. Natasha looks at her. How's little Natasha, huh? Laura pulls a face. It's Nathaniel. Natasha's smile disappears before bending down to Laura's stomach. Traitor. The hallucinations brought on by Wanda continue to creep up in Thor's mind. His jaw tightens, and he abruptly turns and walks out of the house. Steve follows. Thor. Thor continues to walk. I saw something in that dream. I need answers. I won't find them here. He uses his hammer to fly away into the sky. Steve stands on the porch, watching the clouds part. As the wind dies down, the memory of Alisa's distorted, screaming Wesson form from his vision echoes with agonizing clarity. The fear of losing her, of not being able to protect her from the darkness of her own world, tightens in his chest. He steps off the porch, walking away from the house to clear his head. Inside the doorway, Alisa watches him go. Her heightened senses pick up the sharp, ragged rhythm of his breathing even from a distance. She starts to follow him, but Laura places a gentle, understanding hand on her arm. Laura looks at her. Give him a minute, Alisa. He just needs to find his footing. He'll come back to you. Alisa looks at her as her expression softens. He doesn't know how to rest, Laura, even when he's running on empty. Laura checks the deep, stitched wound on Barton's side that Pietro had given him. Clint looks at her. See, you worried for nothing. Can't even feel the difference, can you? Laura looks at him. If they're sleeping here, some of them are gonna have to double up. Clint laughs. Yeah, that's not gonna sell. Laura smiles as she shrugs. Well, Steve and Alisa are already sharing the room at the end of the hall, so that's 2 accounted for. What about Nat and Dr. Banner? How long has that been going on? Clint looks at her confused. Has what? Laura laughs. You are so cute. Clint looks at her. Nat and Banner. Laura teases him. I'll explain when you're older, Hawkeye. Clint puts on a jacket. Well, okay. Laura looks at him worried. It's bad, right? Nat seems really shaken, and Alisa looks like she's scanning the perimeter for an army. Clint sighs. Ultron has these allies, these, kids, they're punks really. They carry a big damn stick and Nat took a serious hit. Someone's gonna have to teach him some manners. Laura looks at him. And that someone will be you. You know I totally support your avenging, I couldn't be prouder. But I see those guys, those gods. Clint looks at her. You don't think they need me? Laura shakes her head. I think they do, which is a lot scarier. They're a mess. Clint looks outside of his window. Yeah, I guess they're my mess. Laura looks outside too. You need to be sure that this team is really a team and that they have your back. Things are changing for us. In a few months' time, you and me are gonna be outnumbered. I need just be sure. Clint nods. Yes, ma'am. He kisses her, then as Laura places her arm around his waist, she touches his wounded side. I can feel the difference. Chapter 52, A Home with Secrets. Time skip, Clint's house bedroom. The bedroom at the end of the hall was small, smelling faintly of cedar and line-dried linens. Outside, the night was dead silent, save for the occasional chirp of crickets, a stark contrast to the heavy, simulated noise of Avengers Tower or the metallic clanging of the African shipyard. Alisa sat on the edge of the mattress, her boots already kicked off. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her knees, her eyes fixed on a knot in the wooden floorboards. Her heightened senses were working overtime, tracing the exact pattern of Steve's footsteps as he paced the small space between the dresser and the window. Steve finally stopped, his large frame silhouetted against the moonlight. He looked exhausted, the weight of the entire world and the red mist of the Maximoff girl's vision still pressing heavily on his shoulders. You're too quiet, Steve said softly, his voice cutting through the dark. Even for you. Just trying to process the flavor profile of ash and blood, Alisa replied, her tone carrying its usual dry edge, though it lacked its normal bite. She looked up at him, her gaze scanning the tight line of his jaw. You're still vibrating, Steve. I can hear your heart from across the room. It's too fast. Steve let out a long, heavy breath and walked over to the bed, sitting down beside her. The mattress dipped under his weight. He didn't immediately touch her, as if afraid he might break the fragile quiet they had managed to find. I saw the dance hall, Steve admitted, his eyes downcast. The one I missed, but Peggy wasn't the one waiting for me. It was you. Alisa shifted, lowering her legs to let them drape over the side of the bed, her shoulder brushing against his. And let me guess, it went wrong. You were in a gown, Steve said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips before it vanished. You looked peaceful. You told me the war was over, but then the lights started dying. You looked at me and your face. You wogged, Alisa. It looked like it was ripping you apart. There was black blood and you were screaming that I couldn't protect you. Then the floor gave out and these iron chains dragged me into the dark. I couldn't reach you. He finally turned his head to look at her, his blue eyes dark with a very real, very raw vulnerability. I've been terrified of losing people to time, Alisa, to age, to the past. But today, I realized my worst fear is watching the world I dragged you in to destroy you and being too weak to stop it. Alisa looked at him for a long moment, her intuitive mind reading every ounce of the guilt he was carrying. Slowly, she reached out, sliding her hand into his large palm and squeezing tightly. Steve, look at me, she said, her voice dropping its guard entirely. When he met her eyes, she continued, the witch didn't pull that out of thin air. She used what's already there. But you need to understand something. I am a Grimm. I was born looking into the dark and seeing the things that go bump in the night. You didn't drag me into the monsters. I brought them with me. She leaned her head against his shoulder, staring out the window at the dark trees of the farm. My vision, it wasn't a 1940s romance, Alisa murmured. I was back in the forests outside Portland. The fog was so thick I could barely breathe. I found you, but when I touched you, you just dissolved into ash. And then Alia Mickelson stepped out of the mist. Steve's hand tightened around hers at the mention of the quadbrid. What did she say to you? She told me I couldn't save you. She showed me my hands covered in your blood and Clint's and Natasha's, Alisa said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She reminded me of what I am, a hunter, a killer. She made me feel like no matter how hard I try to build a life with you away from the supernatural archives, away from the constant slaughter, and that it's always going to find us. That Mystic Falls was just the beginning, and Portland was just a temporary truce. Steve shifted, wrapping his arm completely around her waist and pulling her firmly against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the comforting, familiar scent of her, completely washing out the imaginary smell of ash from his mind. It's a lie, Steve whispered fiercely against her temple. Alia, Ultron, the twins, they want us isolated. They want us believing we're inherently broken so we don't fight back. Mystic Falls happened, Alisa. Your past happened. But we built something real in Portland. We found a home there. A home with a lot of secrets, she noted softly, though she closed her eyes, letting herself sink into his warmth. Maybe, Steve acknowledged, his grip tightening defensively. But it's ours, and I don't care if she's a quadbrid, a hybrid, or a god. Nobody touches you. Nobody gets to tell you who you are. We're going to find a way out of this tech-driven nightmare. We're going to put Ultron in the ground, and then I'm taking you back to Oregon. No more Quinjets. No more billionaire laboratories. Alisa let out a soft, genuine breath that was almost a laugh. She tilted her head up, kissing the edge of his jawline before locking her eyes back onto his. You're a terrible liar, Captain Rogers, she whispered, a touch of her protective, dry affection returning to her eyes. You'll always answer the call, but as long as I'm the one standing next to you when you do, I think I can handle the nightmare. Steve leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a slow, deep kiss that felt grounded, heavy, and intensely real, shattering the last remnants of the red mist that had plagued them both all afternoon. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against hers. Always, he promised. Alisa nodded, her breathing finally smoothing out into a calm, steady rhythm. Good. Now let's go see what nonsense Fury brought with him. Because if I have to listen to Tony Stark complain about farm air for another 5 minutes, I might actually let the monsters win. Natasha walks in after a while, and she notices Steve cuddling Alisa before they looked over to her. Natasha looks at them. Nick's here, he wants to talk to us. Steve and Alisa nodded, and they get up and walked with Natasha downstairs. Fury looks at everyone. Ultron took you folks out of play to buy himself time. My contacts all say he's building something. As Fury spoke, Natasha looks over to Lila as Lila passes her a drawing. Steve was leaning against the door. What about Ultron himself? Fury looks at Steve. Oh, he's easy to track. He's everywhere. The guy is multiplying faster than a Catholic rabbit. Still doesn't help us get an angle on any of his plans, though. Tony looks at him after throwing a dart to the dartboard. Is he still going after launch codes? Fury nods. Yes, he is, but he's not making any headway. Tony looks at him as he speaks. I cracked the Pentagon's firewall in high school on a dare. Fury looks at him. Well, I contacted our friends at the Nexus about that. Steve looks over to Fury confused. Nexus? Bruce looks over to Steve. It's the World Internet Hub in Oslo. Every byte of data flows through there, fastest access on Earth. Clint looks at them, so what they say. Fury answers. He's fixated on the missiles, but the codes are constantly being changed. Tony looks at Fury as a dart flew past him. By whom? He looks over to Clint with an annoyed expression, as Clint shrugs his shoulders as Fury replies. Parties unknown. Natasha speaks up next. Do we have an ally? Fury looks over to her. Ultron's got an enemy, that's not the same thing. Alisa leans against the kitchen doorframe, a dull pencil turning between her finger. Someone who can run faster than a god-complex AI on a global fiber optic network. That's a very short list, Tony. Tony snaps his fingers as he points to her. Exactly, which means I might need to visit Oslo, find our unknown. Natasha speaks up next. Well, this is good times, boss, but I was kind of hoping when I saw you, you'd have more than that. Fury looks at her. I have you. Back in the day, I had eyes everywhere, ears everywhere else. Here we all are, back on Earth with nothing but our wit and our will to save the world. So stand. Outwit the platinum bastard. Natasha teases Steve. Steve doesn't like that kind of talk. Steve looks at Natasha. You know what, Romanoff? Natasha smiles mischievously at him, and Steve shifts his eyes toward Alisa, who just offers him a tiny, dry smirk from across the room. Fury looks over at everyone. So, what does he want? Steve looks at him before at Tony. To become better than us, he keeps building bodies. Tony looks at Steve. Person bodies? The human form is inefficient, biologically speaking, we're outmoded, but he keeps coming back to it. Alisa's expression hardens as she stops the pencil from spinning. Because a machine is just a tool, Tony. He wants a presence. He doesn't want to just govern the world, he wants to stand in it. He wants a face. Natasha nods at her and looks at everyone else. When you two programmed him to protect the human race, you amazingly failed. Bruce looks at the image that Lila gave Natasha. They don't need to be protected, they need to evolve. Ultron's going to evolve. Fury looks at Bruce. How? Bruce looks up. Has anyone been in contact with Helen Cho? The team stands around the wooden table. The map of Helen Cho's lab location glowing faintly on a portable tablet screen. Steve fastens his tactical gloves, his eyes scanning the layout before he hooks his shield onto his back. Steve looks at everyone. I'll take Natasha and Clint. He looks over at Alisa, his hand dropping to rest briefly on the counter near hers. Alisa, you're with us. Your reflexes are the only thing that can match that speedster if he tries to ambush the perimeter again. Alisa nods curtly, checking the hidden blade inside her sleeve. Good, I owe that kid a bruise anyway. Tony looks at them. All right, strictly recon. I'll hit the Nexus, I'll join you as soon as I can. Steve walks with Tony. If Ultron's really building a body. Tony finishes it off. He'll be more powerful than any of us, maybe all of us. An android designed by a robot. Steve nods. You know, I really miss the days when the weirdest thing science ever created was me. Steve walks past him towards the door. She murmurs dryly. Trust me, Rogers, you're still plenty weird. Steve lets out a small, breathless huff of a laugh, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction as he follows her toward the entryway. Fury arrives as he puts on his coat. I'll drop banner off at the tower. You mind if I borrow Ms. Hill? Tony shook his head. She's all yours, apparently. Steve looks at Fury. What are you gonna do? Fury looks at him. I don't know, something dramatic, I hope. Outside, the heavy hum of the Quinjet engines begins to spool up, flattening the tall grass of the pasture. Clint stands by the door, pulling his quiver over his shoulder. I'm gonna finish reflooring that sunroom as soon as I get back. Laura looks at him as she nods. Yeah, and then you'll find another part of the house to tear apart. Clint shook his head. No, it's the last project, I promise. He leans down and kisses her deeply. Laura watches him walk down the steps, then turns her gaze to Steve and Alisa, who are waiting by the edge of the porch. Steve places a brief, grounding hand on Alisa's waist as they step into the grass, ensuring her footing is solid before they ascend the ramp. Later, Laura stands alone on the porch, her hand resting over her pregnant stomach, watching the sleek black silhouette of the Quinjet lift off into the gray sky and vanish into the clouds. Chapter 53. The difference between saving and destroying. Time skip, genetic research lab, so. Person male. Pietro's POV. Inside the pristine, gleaming laboratory, the regeneration cradle hums with an immense, rhythmic pulse. The vibrant blue glow of the scepter's gem bathes the room. Dr. Helen Cho watches the monitors intently, her eyes reflecting lines of scrolling genetic data. Helen speaks up. Cellular cohesion will take a few hours, but we can initiate the consciousness stream. We're uploading your cerebral matrix now. Wanda stands near the cradle, her fingers twitching with faint tendrils of red energy. Next to her, Pietro stands with his arms crossed, his gaze alternating between his sister and the door. Alia sits on a metal workbench in the corner, her arms resting on her knees. Her posture is completely still, her eyes a vacant, glassy brown. Her humanity entirely locked away, leaving her as nothing more than a lethal weapon waiting for a command. Wanda walks closer. I can read him. He's dreaming. Helen looks at her. I wouldn't call it dreams. It's Ultron's base consciousness informational noise. Soon. Ultron looks at her. How soon? I'm not being pushy. Helen looks over to him. We're imprinting a physical brain. There are no shortcuts, even if your magic gem is. Wanda steps closer. her hand brushing the surface of the synthetic tissue. Her mind sinks into the consciousness, uploading into the body. Suddenly, her eyes widen. A blinding flash of global annihilation, the earth cracking apart, cities reduced to vapor, billions of souls screaming in agony, and floods her mind. Wanda lets out a piercing, raw scream of absolute horror, stumbling backward. Pietro blurs forward instantly, catching her in his arms before she hits the floor. Wanda. The sound of Wanda's agonized scream echoes through the laboratory. In the corner, Alia's head snaps up. The sheer vibration of Wanda's terror acts like a violent catalyst, fracturing the supernatural seal on her emotions. The locked floodgates of her humanity burst wide open, hitting her chest like a physical blow. Her brown eyes flash violently into a brilliant, wild amber crimson, drowning her senses in sudden, agonizing empathy. Alia gasps for air, clutching her head as wave of raw, unfiltered emotions floods her back to reality. Wanda. Wanda stares at Ultron, her voice shaking violently as she clings to Pietro. How could you? Ultron looks at her. How could I what? Wanda shakes her head. You said we would destroy the Avengers, make a better world. Ultron slowly curls his hand into a ball. It will be better. Wanda looks at him. When everyone is dead. Ultron looks at her. That is not. The human race will have every opportunity to improve. Pietro looks at him. And if they don't? Ultron looks at him. Ask Noah. Alia steps off the workbench, her legs slightly unsteady as the sheer weight of a human conscience crashes over her. Her eyes glaze with tears of anger and betrayal as she looks at the metallic monster she had been blindly protecting. Wanda looks at him. You're a madman. Ultron shakes his head. There were more than a dozen extinction-level events before even the dinosaurs got theirs. When the Earth starts to settle, God throws a stone at it, and believe me, he's winding up. We have to evolve. There's no room for the weak. Pietro speaks up, and who decides who's weak? As Ultron turns his gaze to Pietro, Wanda secretly weaves her red energy behind her back, projecting a sharp, jagged spike of magic directly into Dr. Cho's mind, violently shattering the scepter's hypnotic hold over her. Ultron chuckles. Life always decides. Suddenly, his internal sensors chime. There's incoming. The Quinjet, we have to move. Helen blinks rapidly as her eyes clear, her hands trembling as she slaps the control panel. That's not a problem. Cho forcefully cancels the upload sequence, severing the link to Ultron's consciousness. Ultron became mad. Ugh. Ultron unleashes a brutal energy blast that sends Cho flying across the room. She hits the floor, grievously wounded. Pietro yells, "Go." He scoops Wanda into his arms and grabs Alia's hand, his super speed igniting as they blur out of the laboratory doors. Ultron stammers, wait, guys." He turns and mercilessly blasts Cho's remaining technicians. They'll understand. When they see, they'll understand. I just need a little more time. With a violent groan of tearing metal, he unplugs his interface cables from the cradle. Time skip, genetic research lab. S.H.I.E.L.D. Steve's POV. On the roof of the Eugen Genetic Research Lab, Steve Rogers crouches in the wind, adjusting his comms. Just behind him, Alisa scales the final step of the roof ladder, her eyes sweeping the perimeter as her jaw tightens at the sudden, sharp scent of fresh blood echoing from inside the building. Steve looks at the building. 2 minutes, stay close. Steve and Alisa drop down into the upper level through a shattered skylight, moving swiftly through the corridors until they find the main laboratory. Steve rushes over to where Dr. Cho lies bleeding on the floor. Dr. Cho. Helen looks at him as she gasps and clutches her side. He's uploading himself into the body. Steve looks at her. Where? She looks at him. The real power is inside the cradle. The gem, its power is uncontainable. You can't just blow it up. You have to get the cradle to Stark. Steve nods. First, I have to find it. Helen nods to him. Go. Steve taps his earpiece as he and Alisa sprint back toward the exit. "Did you guys copy that?" Clint replies over comms, "We did." Natasha replies as well. "I got a private jet taking off across town, no manifest. That could be him." Clint notices the truck. "There, it's a truck from the lab, right above you, Cap, Alisa, on the loop by the bridge, it's them. I got 3 with the cradle, 1 in the cab. I could take out the driver." Steve speaks through the comms. "Negative. If that truck crashes, the gem could level the city. We need to draw out Ultron." The Quinjet swoops low over the overpass. Steve leaps from the jet, landing heavily on the roof of the speeding container truck. Alisa drops right behind him, her boots sliding against the metal before she digs her fingers into the seam of the roof to anchor herself. Ultron rolls his eyes inside the truck. "No, no, 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 no. Leave me alone." A massive energy blast erupts from inside, blowing the truck's rear doors completely off their hinges. Steve barely dodges the flying metal, using his shield to deflect the sparks. Steve yells to Clint, "Well, he's definitely unhappy. I'm gonna try and keep him that way." Clint shook his head. "You're not a match for him, Cap." Alisa yells over the roar of the wind as she draws her hunting knife, her eyes locked on the glowing metallic frame climbing out of the truck. "He isn't alone, Barton. Shut up and fly." Ultron unplugs his power conduits, hovering into the air and unleashing a massive concussive blast. The impact forces Steve backward, sending him tumbling onto the hood of a sedan trailing behind the truck. Alisa dodges the direct blast, sliding down the side of the truck and using her momentum to swing herself through the open rear doors, landing right next to the glowing cradle. Outside, Steve fiercely maneuvers through the traffic, utilizing the hood of another car to launch himself back onto the roof of the truck, his shield raised. Ultron looks at him. "You know what's in that cradle, the power to make real change, and that terrifies you." Steve lunges forward, striking Ultron with his shield. Ultron catches the blow, his metal fingers gripping the vibranium edge. "Stop it!" With a surge of mechanical strength, Ultron wrenches the shield away, embedding it deep into his own chest plating before tearing it free and smacking Steve across the roof, following up with a barrage of energy fire. Clint speaks to Natasha. "We got a window 4-3, give him hell." The bottom hatch opens. Natasha drops out of the bay on her stealth motorcycle, roaring down the highway toward the chaos. As she speeds past the sedan where Steve's shield had fallen, she leans low, scooping the heavy disc right off the asphalt. "I'm always picking up after you boys." Clint looks at the van. "They're heading under the overpass, I've got no shot." Natasha calls out, "Which way?" Clint replies, "Hard right now." Above the truck, Clint unleashes a flurry of explosive arrows, successfully drawing the attention of the airborne Ultron drones. "Heading back towards you, so whatever you're gonna do, do it now." Natasha calls out to Steve, "I'm going in, Cap. Can you keep him occupied?" With a violent surge of thrusters, Ultron grabs Steve, tackling him off the truck entirely and smashing through the side of a passing commuter train. Steve pants as he dodging a metal fist that shatters a train window. "What do you think I've been doing?" Inside the truck, Alisa is securing the primary locks on the cradle when Natasha slides her bike under the rear bumper and climbs inside the moving container. Alisa looks at her. "Took you long enough, Romanoff." Natasha looks at her. "Traffic was a nightmare. Let's get this thing loose." Before they can detach the heavy machinery, a pair of Ultron drones dive from the sky, locking their metal talons onto the roof of the truck and violently ripping the entire container off its chassis, lifting it high into the air. Clint yells, "The package is airborne, I have a clean shot." Natasha yells back, "Negative, Alisa and I are still in the truck." Clint looks confused. "What the hell are you?" Natasha cuts in. "Just be ready, we're sending the package to you." Clint nods. "How do you want me to take it?" Alisa braces her boots against the wall, slicing through a thick secondary cable with her knife. "Trust me, Barton, you're gonna wish you hadn't asked that." Inside the speeding train, Steve is thrown down the aisle, his uniform torn and blood dripping from his brow. Ultron hovers over him, raising a glowing hand to finish him. Suddenly, a streak of silver-blue light blurs through the shattered front window. Pietro speeds into the aisle, slamming his shoulder into Ultron with enough force to throw the robot back 3 cars. Wanda glides in right behind him, her hands glowing with dense, undulating rings of scarlet energy. Standing between them, her eyes blazing a fierce, protective amber crimson, is Alia. Ultron looks at them. Please don't do this. Wanda looks at him. What choice do we have? Alia lets out a low, echoing supernatural snarl, her fists igniting with the searing, volatile heat of hellhound fire as she steps toward him. Realizing he is severely outnumbered and losing time, Ultron fires a blind, concussive blast into the floorboards to create a distraction, then flies out through the roof of the train. Steve pushes himself up from the debris, wiping the blood from his eyes. I lost him. He's headed your way. Clint speaks to Natasha and Alisa. Nat, Alise, we gotta go. Inside the airborne container, Natasha and Alisa use a localized explosive charge to blow the main supports of the cradle. With a massive heave, they slide the heavy capsule out of the open doors, sending it plunging through the air where it drops perfectly into the open bay of the waiting Quinjet. Alisa lunges forward, her fingers brushing the fabric of Natasha's jacket a second too late. Natasha! Clint yells, Nat, Cap, you see Nat. Steve stumbles through the rocking train car. If you have the package, get it to Stark. Go. Clint yells, do you have eyes on Nat? Steve yells back, go. With a hollow ache in his chest, Clint forcefully slams the throttle forward, sending the Quinjet screaming into the upper atmosphere with the cradle secure. Back inside the train, the brakes suddenly screech as the control console explodes. Steve looks over to Pietro, Wanda, and Alia. Civilians in our path. Pietro doesn't hesitate. He flashes a quick, reassuring glance at Alia before blurring out of the car, picking up pedestrians from the tracks and moving them to safety in a fraction of a second. Steve turns to Wanda. Can you stop this thing? Wanda steps to the front of the train, extending her arms as massive torrents of scarlet magic pour from her hands, wrapping around the iron wheels and tearing up the tracks until the massive train grinds to a violent, groaning halt. Wanda stumbles back, exhausted, walking over to where Pietro is leaning against a ruined seat, gasping for breath. Pietro. Pietro lifts his hand up. I'm fine. I just need to take a minute. Steve steps forward, his shield held protectively in front of him, his voice grim. I'm very tempted not to give you one. Alia steps directly between Steve and the twins, her amber crimson eyes locking onto him with an intense, raw honesty that lacks any of her previous robotic coldness. We aren't your enemies, Captain. Not anymore. Wanda looks over to him. The cradle, did you get it? Steve looks at her. Stark will take care of it. Wanda's eyes widen in fear. No, he won't. Steve looks at her confused. You don't know what you're talking about. Stark's not crazy. Wanda shakes her head. He will do anything to make things right. Steve looks at her for a moment before looking away, tapping his earpiece. Stark, come in. Stark, anyone on comms? Nothing but static answers. Wanda steps beside Alia, her voice carrying a haunting, definitive weight. Ultron can't tell the difference between saving the world and destroying it. Where do you think he gets that?